Okay, we're going to start. Tonight is one of the most important parts of Hilchot Shabbat. Whoever came today is lucky. The following halachot that we'll be covering between tonight and next week are relevant almost every Shabbat. Not that the rest is not relevant, but we don't come across them as often. There are so many important concepts and quite a few details in bishul, in cooking, that we're going to have to divide it into 2 weeks or more. So today we'll cover some of it, and the next week we'll cover the rest. We've covered so far all the melachot leading to bishul, from the beginning of the harvest, of the ketirah, of the imur, of gathering, of the gisha, of the borer, the zoreh, the winnowing, and we've covered the lash, meraked, which means to sift and to knead the dough. We're ready to cook and bake. Right? This is the next step. One of the melachot that was prohibited, that is prohibited because it was found in the Mishkan. One of the melachot that was quite common, whether it was to bake or cook, prepare the lechem hapanim, or whether it was to prepare the herbs from which they made the dyes, the tzvaim, the colors, to make the various things that needed to be colored. So when we talk about bishul and afiyah, we're talking about any form of cooking or baking, roasting or frying. All of that is asur on Shabbat. Okay? However, it would be simple if that's all we would need to say, but obviously we need to discuss what is considered cooking and baking, at what temperature, or what happens if the food has been already cooked, can you warm it up again? So there are quite a few halachot, and many of them are midrabanan, a rabbinic decree. So I'm going to go through first the oraita, okay, like the part that deals with what is prohibited by Torah, and I'm going to go through the more important concepts that we become familiar with, some of which we'll cover next week, but at least the concept we have to know at this age. Alright, cooking does not necessarily involve food. When we talk about the prohibition of bishul, it implies anything that we're changing its composition as a result of heat. As a result of applying heat, you are changing its composition. That happens to food, raw food, or liquid, right? You change its composition when it's warmed up to a certain temperature, to a certain degree. It happens also to sha'ava, to wax, when you melt it. It happens to matechet, it happens to metal, when you melt it or when you soften it. And it can happen also to visa. Now this is a big surprise to many of you perhaps, that you cannot dry wet clothing on the stove, where it's yet soleded, or in other words, where it's very warm. So that would be a form of bishul, believe it or not. It could be also a form of milapen, cleansing it better. As a result of the heat being applied to clothes that is very wet, soaking wet, the drying of the water on the clothes, on the visa, on the laundry, is asur on Shabbat. Eventually, we'll be covering a lot of the halachot in the Rabbanan that are asur for other reasons, like marit ayin. You cannot take something which is very wet and just put it in your backyard and hang it on the lines that you hang, because people might think, oh, you're doing your wash. It looks like you're doing something which is asur on Shabbat, even though all you did was take your raincoat or whatever it was that was very wet in the rain and just hang it outside. Okay, you want to just put it somewhere, put it in the bathtub or somewhere where it doesn't appear to be that you're washing something and drying it. So all of this would be a form of bishul in a sense, but especially the first three, whether you're hardening or softening, you're changing the composition of the food item or non-food item through heat. All of these would be asur midoraita. The one good thing about bishul, which is not so often seen in Shabbat, is that let's say somebody by mistake put something into the pot, something that was not cooked. You can't cook on Shabbat, but by mistake he did it. He does not transgress immediately, because that item is not cooked yet. Right? It takes a little bit of time for the cook. Well, guess what? We still remove it, and nothing happens. And that's what he would need to do. He still has time to move. Remember, we discussed something similar about doreah. When does time occur? As soon as the seed falls to the ground, or after it germinates? There's a question about that. So if by mistake some seeds fell on the ground where they may germinate, you could remove them immediately, right? Some say that you would have to wait till after Shabbat, right? That was the question, whether you can remove them immediately, or whether you can wait till after Shabbat. It all depends on the type of seed that it is. Because we have issues of mukatu. So that was a similar situation of where is something happening right away, or do you still have time to fix it, to correct it? In bishul, you still have time to correct it, because the bishul does not happen right away as soon as the food gets in contact with the heat. Yeah, an example is by mistake you put some food item that you thought was cooked into the pot that's on the fire. Right? It's already something you wanted to add you thought that this vegetable was already cooked. A typical example would be, where this could happen with spaghetti, noodles. Noodles that were, noodles you may be able to detect right away that it's raw. Anything which you thought was cooked, you want to add some more to the pot because you have more gas. Now, if it's already cooked, we will see that there are various leniencies and how you can rewarm it on Shabbat. But if it's not, then you're cooking it. So you, by mistake, you took something that was wrong, that was not cooked, and you put it. You can still remove it and not transgress the Yisur of Bishul on Shabbat. So that happens after a while. You still have a chance to remove it. Yeah. Right.
You said your wife is birthday, make two officials, going over that, you will take the hay.
Right.
But you started to, are you going over by eating that, Rabbi?
No, the one who makes it has a problem, not the one who eats it. No. Obviously, you're not allowed to benefit from something that was under prohibited. That's already a different issue. We'll cover that another time. What to do if something was done that's against the halakha, right? What do you do then? Can you benefit? Depends who did it. If a goy did it, if a Jew did it, who it was done for, and so forth. All right, the next point is, okay, so now we figured out that it takes a little bit of time to cook. How much time is that? This will make a big difference in many areas of the halakha of bishul. Well, the basic criteria for bishul is that it has to be edible. Otherwise, the cooking didn't accomplish what it's supposed to. Or it has to start melting. Otherwise, you just warmed up the metal or the wax. It has to have an effect. And an effect for food that's solid, as opposed to something which is liquid. For solid food to be considered cooked to the point that one is considered transgressing the melacha, and for other reasons as well, it has to be edible. So what's something edible? How much cooking is required to make something edible? So the rabbis did not give us a certain amount of time, because it all depends what you're cooking. What they did give us is something called ma'achal ben drusai. So you want to be familiar with this concept, ma'achal ben drusai, which is the food that was eaten by Ben Drusai. Ben Drusai was a thief, and he did not have time to cook his food. He was always rushing. So he always cooked his food a little bit. Not well done. What's the opposite of well done? Rare. Okay, it will be close to rare. The question is, what's ma'achal ben drusai? So we have two opinions of what ma'achal ben drusai is. Today it doesn't really make a difference what ma'achal ben drusai is, because most people may not be able to detect that difference. But one opinion holds that it's half the cooking process, 50%, and some say it's 1/3. Rashi says it's 1/3, the Rambam says 50%. The Sephardim would follow the Bet Yosef, therefore will follow the Rambam, because 50% makes it cooked. That's it. You're transgressing it only at the point where it's cooked 50%. Under 50% is not considered cooked, which implies two things. Depends how you look at it. That could be strict or lenient. If 50% is considered cooked and nothing less, that means you haven't transgressed until you get to 50%. On the other hand, you will see later that this is not lenient. He's not being lenient. He's being strict in another area of en bishul achar bishul. So don't think that one is more lenient than the other. It all depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about the transgression, one requires 50%, the other says it's enough to transgress it if it was cooked a third. But today, for practical reasons, we don't always detect the difference between a third and a half. But if it's already somewhat cooked, then we may suspect that it's already ma'achal ben drusai, and it may help us or not, depending on what's happening. So this is an important concept to remember, because this will help us a lot next week when we talk about the many details of something called hazara, how to warm food, how to put it back on the fire. Is there any way that's permissible? Food that was in the refrigerator, food that's already cooked. Right now we're concentrating on food that was not cooked, and how it becomes cooked, and at what temperature. So right now we have a concept, we don't have temperatures yet. It would help if we had temperatures. So rabbis trying to figure this out, and they said that with temperatures, we can only apply temperatures to liquids. There's no temperature in solids. Solids, you just look at it. It's not a matter of feeling it. If you wonder if a solid food is cooked to ma'achal ben drusai or not, you have to look at it and, have experience. Is this 1/3 cooked? Well, if you know how much time has elapsed, that may help you. If something takes there, usually an hour to cook, if 20 minutes pass by, that's already a third. Perhaps, right? So the only way you can tell if something is cooked by ma'achal ben drusai is by looking at it. But with liquid, there's a different measurement. It's not when it becomes edible necessarily. With liquid, the rule is yad soledebo. Yad soledebo means, if we translate it literally, that you can't stick your hand or your finger and hold it there for long. You immediately remove it. When you touch a cup of tea or hot tea, that's called yad soleded. You cannot hold on to it. You cannot dip your finger. You could, but you would immediately remove it. That's the shiur in liquid, and that's going to be very important to us soon. This concept of yad soledet bo. Now the Ben Ish Chai has another way of demonstrating yad soledet bo. He says, if you want to know if something is yad soledet bo, if you can't just drink it, you can't put it in your mouth and you just can't swallow it easily, that's called yad soledet bo. In other words, you will not easily be able to drink it. So there are various ways of measuring this, but approximately they're very similar. It's not boiling hot, but it's not just lukewarm. It's in between. Okay? Yeah, right. It's not lukewarm and it's not boiling. Now, boiling is important according to some opinion, because if something was only yat soledet and it never reached the point of boiling, you may not be able to ever rewarm it again. Because even though there are some rules about bishul, har bishul, some are strict about the degree of cooking or boiling of the water, that if it has not reached roteach, if it's never boiled at least once, it has never been fully cooked. But as far as the transgression, that's what we're talking about right now, all that is required to transgress the isur of bishul when it comes to liquid is if it reached the point of yat soledet. Once it has become so hot that you cannot easily touch it, then that's called bishul when it comes to liquid. So what's the temperature on that? On that we can figure out temperatures. But even in that area there's various opinions, and I didn't write it down here, but approximately in Fahrenheit it would be between 110 and 120. In Celsius it's between 43 and 49 Celsius. It varies, there's different opinions. Some are more lenient, some are more strict. Depends what the application here is. It can make a difference later on. But this is approximately, if you want to know temperature-wise, this is what it is about it. Right, but every solid is different. That's about it. With solids, they're all different, and they become. Remember, the main criteria is edible by solids, so they're all different. So we don't use temperature by solids. Whereas with liquids, it's pretty much uniform. Even though different liquids will definitely boil at different temperatures, but here we can have an approximate idea of what the temperature is like. Whereas with solids, we can't do that. Okay, well, right. So right now, so far, we've talked about items that have never been cooked, raw, water that's never been boiled. You cannot take these food items, according to the Torah, and bring them to that temperature if it's a liquid, or if it's a solid, bring it to the point of ma'achal ben rusai. Yeah, we will see in which application can you nevertheless bring it to something less than that. Since you mentioned it, I'll already talk about it now. Let's say you want to defrost something that's raw, or I should say raw, it's never been cooked. You cannot defrost it close to the fire, to the flame. We're not talking about directly in the flame. Even close to the flame, where it might reach a temperature of yat soledet, or if you left it at that fire. But if you left it further away, where it will defrost, warm up a little bit, but it will never come, that solid, that liquid, whatever it is, will never come to yat soledet, then there's no problem. See where that could be important? Something that's cold. What is that? No, that makes a difference. Something that was previously cooked is different. We'll talk about that soon. Something that was never cooked. You see, orange juice is usually pasteurized, so even that would be considered cooking. So there are different set of rules for those items that have already been cooked. Right, exactly. Good. Okay, so it would make a difference when we talk about himum right here at the bottom. I'll get into that a little bit more in depth. But right now we've been talking about raw items and how one transgresses the bishul, depending on if it's a solid or if it's a liquid. And it's important to keep in mind these two concepts of machal ben drusai when it comes to solid and yat soledet when it comes to liquid. These are the shi'urim, or the measurements that will help us determine if something is permissible or not. There's one more item that can come very close to bishul, and one has to be very careful what you think about. And I listed four that are the most common ones, especially the first three. The first one is called megis. I wrote this in Hebrew because the English would be hard to translate. It's dealing with many concepts here. Megis means to sear. Okay, you have a pot in the fire. Are you allowed to sear, sir? What's the problem? If the food item has not fully completely cooked, by moving it around, you're helping the cooking process. That's called memaheret habishul. You're speeding up the cooking by stirring it. So if it's not fully cooked, if something is not fully cooked, or even if you suspect that it's not fully cooked, you just put it a half an hour ago on top of the fire. Erev Shabbat, you put something on the fire. Okay? Regardless of what it is. Or whether it's a crock pot, whether it's on the flame, whether it's on the blast, you don't know if it's fully cooked. You cannot take something to move the food around if it's already Shabbat. Because that's called memaheret bishul. You're bringing the cooking closer, you're speeding it up. That's called bishul. Even though you're not cooking, it's already on the fire. It was there before Shabbat, but because you're stirring it, you are speeding it up. That's called bishul too. So this is, one has to be very careful. Now what happens if you took the pot off the fire? If it's still very, very hot, it makes no difference. As long as it was not fully cooked yet, you have a problem. You should therefore not stir it. The question arises is what happens if it's already completely cooked? Why is it such a big deal? Because sometimes you want to move things around, or you simply want to take the food out directly with a ladle into a plate and into another pot. And you do that. After all, when you're taking out, you may come to stir. We're not concerned about that. If something is fully cooked, remember, fully cooked, you can remove the content of that pot into another pot. Removing, as long as you're not stirring, is never a problem. We're not concerned. As long as it's fully cooked, we don't check, you may come to it. But even if you do want to stir the food, if it's fully cooked, you should not do it while it's on the flame. Definitely not. Even if it's fully cooked. We are mahmir. We're very strict about stirring the food, even if you know it's fully cooked. You don't take a spoon, oh, I'd like the potatoes, and get a little browner, I'm going to put them at the bottom. You don't move things around when they're on the fire. If it's not on the fire, and it's still very hot, some are also mahmir, But we're not, you can be a little bit more lenient if it's already not on the fire, and it's fully cooked. The big question is removing something directly from the fire. Some are of the opinion that it's best to just remove the whole sear, the whole pot from the fire, and then start taking out. Never, especially Ashkenazim, not all Ashkenazim, are very mahmir, not to take out from the crock pot directly, but to remove the crock pot. How if there's an insert, put it down. As long as you don't plan to put it back, you can put it down. The reason why this is sometimes difficult is for those who want to put it back. Once you put it down, you cannot easily put it back. So you have to hold it and somebody else has to take out. But that's for those who are mahmir. If it's fully cooked and all you want to do is remove the content, there's no problem. I'm just letting you know that there are some who are careful, who are strict, that they never remove something directly if it's sitting on the fire. They remove the pot from the fire. But as far as searing, you should be careful. Never to sear, even if it's fully cooked, when it's on the flame. Because that could be a bishul, especially if something could have not been cooked. Just another little note, when you are removing contents, make sure that the ladle is clean, that there are no drops of water, that it's not wet, especially if the liquid is cold, because by inserting that wet ladle, you're cooking it inside. Right, if you see them, it's usually a little warm, it's okay. But if it's just cold, you just wash it and it's still wet, very wet. You want to dry it before you put it inside. So that is one form of the maher bishul called stirring. The next one is tui. You want to cover the pot, Shabbat already. You can't cover the pot if it's uncovered. Because the covering of the pot is also mimaher bishul. It also increases or speeds up the cooking process. And if the food is not fully cooked, it's a problem. Right? So then it doesn't make that much of a difference. Right? But we still don't do it. We still are careful because we don't really know how well something is cooked or not. And so we're careful with the psugi of its zera. Unless it had one and somehow it fell off, that would be okay. But you have to be careful with you can't just cover with anything. It doesn't have to be with a lid. It's a towel. Eventually we'll talk about how people used to use towels to surround the pots to increase the heat. In those days they didn't have necessarily ovens all the time to get their food warm. So there was something called hasmana, where they would cover up. So we'll talk about that eventually. So the kisui means, regardless of what you use to cover the pot, is a sur. Hetui is not too common today. Hetui means to move around the coals. When we talk about the blech, or the cover on top of the flame, we'll talk about more about hetui. The olden days, they used coals, and they used to move around the coals in order to get the flame going a little bit better. Right? That you can't do. So today, the only thing that is similar to this, and not using coals, is increasing the flame. That is why some people who have a blech that covers the fire, they also cover the knob, either with aluminum foil or with part of the blech hanging down. So you don't have to do that. We're not really concerned that you might forget, because you already see the cover on the fire. But, just to show you how we can apply today, the hetui today, the problem of moving around the coals can be similar to moving or touching the actual knobs of the stove. And the last one is called kiruv. Let's say you come home from school, say, oh no, I put the pot, soup, or shalom, or whatever, in such a location on the blech, so far from the flame that if I leave it there, it will never get hot, and it might even boil. It's so far, it will never get warm enough. Okay, you're going to warm it up, you can't do that. Okay, if it's in a place, if it's on a point, in a location, where it will never become warm at all, or it will be very, very cool, then you can't move it over. On the blech it's possible to move things as long as it's not too far from the flame. It does reach a certain high temperature, it does become warm, then you want to move it back and forth so it doesn't overcook or boil. As long as it maintains a high degree of heat, that will be okay. We'll talk about that in session 2, on how to move things around as long as they're still on the blech, as long as it's still warm. But if it's in such a place, in such a spot that it will never become warm, it will never cook well, you can't just move it on Shabbat, because that is basically like a shul. You're bringing about to a temperature where it will cook and heat up, and that's a tool. So right now what we've done is cover the applications of bishul midoraita. not all the possibilities, but quite a few possibilities on how that may come about in the various ways. Now we'll just cover a little bit of the content that are more midrabanan, by rabbinic decree. Yeah. Okay. No, describe to me what you want to do exactly. I didn't understand. How do you have the chicken? In what? In a pan? And where is it sitting? Why is it on the blast? Because it was already roasted before Shabbat? In the oven, right. And now you're just maintaining it warm. Okay. At the very bottom? That's not a problem. No, because the whole thing was already cooked and warm. No. Right now, we're not talking about, you're talking about like an aluminum pan. I was talking about a pot or something that is cooking, right, on the fire. This is just maintaining it warm. It's not going to make a difference. Yeah, it's not going to make a big difference. The covering of the pot makes a difference when it's directly on the flame. Alright, so now we need to understand about how to warm our food. There are various contexts. And I divided it into four. One is the warming up of something that was never cooked to begin with. You cannot warm up any food item close to the fire, even though you're not putting it on the fire. Let's say you have a radiator. It will get very hot too. So you can't put it on. It makes no difference where you put it. You can't even put it close to it if it's going to become hot enough that it's going to be just legible. What if you say, I'm only going to defrost it, and then I'm going to remove it? You can't do that because you may forget. You know what I mean? You might say, okay, I'll just put it there for 5 minutes for it to defrost, and then I'll come back. No, you can't do that because you may forget, and it may become legible. That would be a food. A little bit farther away. As long as it's not on a spot where it will reach that it will become so hot that you won't be able to touch it. If it becomes that hot on that spot, you cannot put it on that spot. So this applies to basically food items that have not been cooked. Because as we will see, there are leniencies with items that have been cooked. Alright, here comes the big one. Liquids. Something that's been cooked. Let's say tea. You drank your tea, but you had a guest over your house, you didn't finish it, and now it cooled off. After talking so long, completely cold. Can you add some more boiling water on it? Can you re-warm it? Okay, let me tell you something. Even though I may be jumping around a little bit, it's important because otherwise we may not understand it very clearly. I'm going to introduce to you right now two rules in Shabbat. One is en bishul achar bishul. There is no cooking once something has been cooked. Once something has already been cooked, you can't take that piece of chicken that's already been cooked and roasted and just put it back into the pot of soup that's sitting on top of the fire. There are ways to warm up that chicken. How to warm food properly on Shabbat. But en bishul achar bishul means that if it's already cooked and roasted and you by mistake did put it into the pot on fire, nothing happens. You did not commit any avon. The only reason you can't do it is because it looks like you're cooking. That's all. It's midrabanan. Yeah, so we'll talk about how to do it properly. But in case you did it, en bishul achar bishul, you can't cook and cook again. It's been cooked. However, there's a question of whether yesh atiyah achar bishul or bishul achar atiyah. Let's say something has been cooked. Can I bake it now? Can I put it into the oven? Or something that has been baked, challah. Can I put it into hot soup? Matzah? You see where that question comes up? Matzah. Some people like matzah in their soup. Or challah in the soup. Usually the soup bowl is usually not a problem. We will see, because by the time the soup is in the bowl, it's not so hot anyway. But there's a question whether if there is bishul achar atiyah, because we just said there's no bishul achar bishul. Once you cook something, you can't cook it again. Definitely midrabanan. That's the prohibition of warming it up again. But there are some who hold that there is a problem, and we are mahmir, that you cannot take something that was cooked and put it in a place where it may roast or bake, or the other way around. Yes. Okay. Croutons. Right. No problem. Into the soup bowl, not into the pot. Right. We'll see why you can do that. But right now, these are important concepts. So now, if I have already tea has been already cooked, do I say en bishul achar bishul? There's a question about liquids. Because liquids are not like solids. Some say yesh bishul achar bishul belach. Guess what? This is one area where Sephardim are stricter than Ashkenazim. So according to the Bet Yosef, we go by the opinion of yesh bishul achar bishul belach when it comes to liquids. Lach is liquid. That if a liquid, even though it was cooked once, the tea was cooked and it's completely cold, you can't warm it up again. In other words, you can't warm it up to the point of yatzaledible. Why? Because you're recooking it. So according to the Bet Yosef, if your tea is no longer hot, that's yatzaledible, you can't recook it. Now, how are you going to recook it anyway? We're not talking about putting it back on the fire. By adding hot water from the urn. That may not necessarily be a problem, but just so you can understand the concept, if the tea completely cooled off, it's a problem according to everybody. But according to the Bet Yosef, according to the Sephardic custom, even if it's not completely cooled off, even if it's lukewarm, you cannot rewarm that tea. Ashkenazim hold as long as it's a little bit warm, just a little bit lukewarm, you can still add boiling hot water from the urn. Now, so if you have a little bit of tea left at the bottom and it's completely cold, according to everybody, you can't pour hot boiling water on that little bit of cold water because that little bit of cold water will become cooked. If you have half a cup of cold water and all you're doing is adding a little bit of warm water, that cold water at the bottom, half a cup, cannot become cooked just by adding a little bit of warm water. So it all depends really how much tea you have left in the cup. So everybody agrees if you have completely cool liquid, completely cold tea, that you cannot reheat it by putting it on the flame somehow. If you had a kettle, completely cold off, you can't put it on the black again. Completely cold. Take out from the refrigerator a dish that has lots of liquid. It's cold. It's completely cold. It's been in the fridge. Some things you can't warm up. That you will not be able to warm up according to anybody. If it's going to become yat soledebo, if it's going to become so warm that you won't be able to touch it. Why? It's liquid. And it's completely cold. Everybody agrees you can't rewarm it. So whether it's a cup of tea, whether it's something that you had in the fridge from Friday night that has liquid, it's not a solid, you cannot rewarm it at a point on a spot where it's going to become yat soledebo. Yes? Right. Right. Tea essence is cold.
Right, so you can't warm that.
You cannot warm up tea essence. That's another good example. But you can add the tea essence to the hot water in a cup. And we'll talk about that, so why you can add it to the cup. If the cup is boiling hot water, and usually whatever is in the bottom is hotter than whatever is on top. It's going to come down. So how could you add it? Something called klishani or klishishit that makes a difference. But otherwise, that's another good example. The essence of a tea is cold. You cannot take out the essence now. I want it to be hot. But no, it's liquid. It's completely cooled off. Even according to Ashkenazim, you can't warm it up again. Why? Because we are strict when it comes to liquid. They cannot be rewarmed. But if it's lukewarm, you can still rewarm it. Only according to Ashkenazim. According to the Sephardic tradition, if it's no longer yat soledet on the liquid, you cannot rewarm it anymore. Okay? So that's the... No, they have to convert it. No, of course not. Same thing if you're an Ashkenaz and you can't eat palau, you cannot eat rice at a Sephardic house. They have to be careful with you, right? No, it's not possible to change that. There are things that were more lenient, but not these halachot. Right. That's a different problem. No, it's also a different problem. Pesach, we have the problem of perhaps part of the matzah was not fully baked to you because there are questions of chametz. But there's also this problem. But in Yom Tov, you don't have this problem anyway. Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook it baked, right? So that would not be an issue on Yom Tov unless it's Yom Tov on Shabbat. But you have the secondary problem of chametz. So this issue of liquid is a very common problem. But if we're dealing with a cup, it's usually not a problem because it's something called klishani that I'll talk about soon. Alright, then we have the third idea of warming, third concept, warming something that's not a liquid but something that's solid that has already been cooked. That can be okay, that can be permissible as long as it's done properly. And I'm not going to get into all the details, that's for next week. How to warm up something which is a solid, not a liquid, because we just finished saying liquids are tricky. But if I have chicken in the refrigerator, right, that I want to rewarm for the day, how do I do it? But it's not a problem. We're dealing with a rabbinic prohibition here because it's already being cooked. And we just learned that en bishul achar bishul. So it's only a rabbinic prohibition. And there are therefore ways of rewarming foods that are solids and not liquids. And in this area, there's also differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, where Sephardim are somewhat more lenient in this one than Ashkenazim. That will leave for next week. This number 3 has a little bit to do with number 4. Number 4 is called chazara. Chazara means to put something back on the flame that was there originally, but you took it off. Something that's on the flame and you remove it, you may not be able to put it back. That is the whole idea of blech. One of the reasons of why we use blech, which is a Yiddish word for the piece of metal, sheet metal or whatever that covers the flame, is in order to allow us chazara in an easy way. Chazara means to put something back. Basically, we're going to talk about that next week, I think. If you took something off the fire and you have no cover on the fire, you can never put it back on the fire. Also, only because of marit ayin. If fully cooked, there's no problem with bishul according to the Torah. Midrabanan, there's a problem. You will not be able to put it back on the flame. If it is covered, then you can put it back as long as certain conditions are met. And we're going to talk about those conditions next week. So these are the categories or the various possibilities of how to rewarm food or how that can come about. And some of them are permissible and some of them are not. This one somebody asked me about, that is defrost something. You can defrost it if it's not going to be at a spot where it's going to become yatsoledeful, then it's okay. Otherwise, you cannot defrost it. Unless, of course, it's something that was fully cooked, then that's a whole different story. That was mostly relevant to something that was not cooked, because we were concerned that it should not come to yatsoledeful. All right, real quickly, these two items here. We have something called tolda shel ish. Every melacha has a tolda. Melacha, the av melacha is the main category of work that is prohibited in Shabbat. There are many toladot. Toladot are descendant or related, things that are similar to it. A tolda of ish would be a hot pan, a hot pot. How did it become hot from the fire? But now it's no longer sitting in the fire. You can still not put an egg inside and fry it, even though there's no more fire, right? Fire is gone. It's very hot. I cannot put something that will become very warm, very hot, in this pot or pan, because that's the tolda shel ish, and it's just like the ish. Even though the ish is gone, the fire is gone. Another example of a tolda shel ish would be the irui itself, which we'll see what that means soon. Irui is pouring. Pouring hot water, the water that is being poured is no longer on the fire. But however, you are pouring it onto other food, right? Let's say you have a piece of lemon in your heat, right? And you're pouring hot boiling water onto it. So you're cooking the lemon or the liquid. That's called an irui. Even though it's no longer on the fire, because of the temperature, it can cause a bishul. It may cause a bishul. Now this is not as powerful as sitting on the fire directly, but nevertheless, it's a tolda of esh, it's a sur. And we will see, nevertheless, how it's possible, how it's permissible to have irui. So we always pour. But so just that you should know, irui is a form of tolda shel ish, even though it's no longer in the fire, it can still be very hot, and it can still cause bishul. Another example is a hot boiling pot. Like a hot boiling pot that was once on the fire, and you removed it and put it on the table or on the counter. That is still very, very hot. There's no fire, and it could still bring about bishul. We're talking about, again, midoraita over here, not midorabanan. These can still bring about a bishul, and that is because they are toldot shel ish. They may still be hot enough. They can still cause bishul. It has nothing. It doesn't make a difference that the fire is no longer there. You don't need the original fire to make bishul. But this has become hot from the original fire. So before we go to the last one, which is mutar, which is cooking in the sun, I think that's towards the end. That's the fun one, solar heating. This is a very important part of Hilchot Shabbat. Recognizing the various kelim on Shabbat and how they have different degrees of heat and how they may be used. So Kli Rishon is the most powerful one. Kli Rishon is the first pot that was originally sitting on the fire. A Kli Rishon can be still on the fire or could be removed from the fire. It makes almost no difference whether it's on the fire or you just 5 minutes ago removed it from the fire. As long as it's still very hot to the touch, you can add almost nothing to it, including croutons, including spices. Oh, it needs a little bit more salt. Can't add it to a Kli Rishon. To the original pot, you're tasting it, it needs a little bit more salt, or pepper, or whatever. You cannot add it, whether it's on the flame, or whether it's removed from the flame. Because even though it's removed from the flame, as long as it's still very hot, this category of keli is called Kli Rishon. It's a very, very, very hot keli. It's the original one, that's where it was cooked, and it preserves the heat for a little while. You can add. The only items that you can add to Kli Rishon that you remove from the fire, you know what it is? Bull's meat. An ox, a bull, the meat is very, very hard. Today you don't see it in the market except it's ground. They don't sell, most people can't eat it so easily. Basar hashor, it's very, very hard. That requires a lot of heat to cook well. That would be the only thing that you can add to Kli Rishon that was removed from the fire. Or the rough salt, when they mine it, not the kitchen salt that we have, the table salt. The coarse salt, that requires so much heat to cook that if you add that to Kli Rishon after it was removed from the fire, it will be okay. Because there's very few items, that require a lot of heat that a Kli Rishon could not cook them if it was removed from the fire. Now obviously if it's still on the fire you can't put anything because you're mamash cooking it. But even if it was removed from the fire, you have to be careful not to add anything as long as it's still hot to the touch. The coarse, the one that's used for miliha, have you ever seen how they salt the chickens? Yeah, that kind of salt. That's not the salt that you use in your kitchen on your table. What? Yeah, at this point, after it's removed from the fire. Right, the Kli Rishon is still very, very hot even after it's removed from the fire. So there's very few items that you can add at that point. You have to be careful. As long as it's hot enough, you can't add anything to that pot. Okay. The problem is that, well, I shouldn't say the problem. The good news is that many of the spices that we have been already cooked. Right? So if you know that something was cooked, you have to know that. It went through the processing of cooking at the factory. Then remember what we said before? And bishul achar bishul. As long as it's not on the fire, right? Because of marit ayin and other problems, if it's cooked already and it's solid, it's not a liquid, then that spice, you may be able to add it. So that's a good point that you raised. As long as you know it's been cooked at the factory. We don't always know that. I'm told that the salt that we use at the table has been processed, has been cooked. But in case you want to add it, you always say for adding it later. I'll show you why. But so Kli Rishon is very tricky. As long as it's still hot, you should be careful not to add anything to it. There's something called Kli Sheni. Kli Sheni, according to most rabbis, and no mevashel, it does not have the power to cook anymore. So once you've taken the original liquid and transferred it into another pot, into a soup bowl, you take it from the pot that was removed from the fire, and you transfer it to bowls of soup. Those are Kli Sheni. Kli Sheni does not have any more the koach, the strength to cook. So you can add almost anything. I say almost. You will see what you can add. Almost anything can be added to Kli Sheni. Why? Because once it reaches the bowl, the walls of the bowl, of the plate, cool it off. Just by moving from one to another, that in itself cools it off. And even if it's yad soledet, that's the hadush over here. Even if it's yad soledet, and it may be just as hot as the Kli Rishon, they're both yad soledet. Kli Sheni will not cook. Kli Rishon will. Yes. Yeah. No, well, I'm going to get to that now. That's the next point. Exactly the next point. Where is Kli Sheni important? When it comes to something called Kalei HaBishul, down here. So I'm jumping to here. Kalei HaBishul, there are some items that cook very easily, even in low temperatures, like Spanish mackerel. Some kinds of fish that are very, very thin and delicate. You put it into a Kli Sheni even. That's just the absolute, it's not too hot. If it's Kli Sheni, it can still cook. It can still become perfectly fine, perfectly edible. Some say that na'na or tea leaves are kalei bishul. We don't know for sure what temperature is required to cook them. So therefore we are careful not to put na'na or tea leaves or tea bags into a Kli Sheni. So that's where Kli Sheni is important to know, that even though it's Kli Sheni, but if it's kalei bishul, any item that might easily cook, we don't take a chance of putting it into a Kli Sheni, we put it into a Kli Shlishi. So we take that cup of water, of hot boiled water, and we put it into a second cup. That second cup would be a Kli Shlishi. Right? The Kli Rishon is the original water, you poured it once, now you're pouring it again. Kli Shlishi is for sure not a problem. Put anything you want in there. Yeah. Why what? By the point it reaches Kli Shlishi, it does not have the strength, the rabbis tell us, to cook anymore. That's the physics of how it works. That's what the halakha establishes. That by the time it reaches the Kli Shlishi, it's not strong enough, even if it's still hot. Right? Remember I said Kli Sheni, even if it's yad soledable, there are some who are careful with it's yad soledable, but we go by the opinion that you don't have to be so strict with Kli Sheni unless you're dealing with kalei habishul, items, food items that might cook, then you have to be careful with Kli Sheni. But croutons or things like that, let's say you want to warm up a baby bottle, a formula, whatever. You can put it into a Kli Sheni. Right? You pour hot water from the kumkum or from the urn into, I used to do it within a filat yadayim. With that, to wash your hands. So it's a Kli Sheni, put the bottle inside of it. After 3 minutes or so, maybe less, it was warm. I would, feel on my hand, on my wrist, if it was not too hot for the baby. After a while, you become an expert these days. Changing diapers, everything. So, Kli Sheni can be okay, depending on what you're doing. You can put croutons into Kli Sheni, into the bowl of soup, because it's not hot enough to cook these things. Even though we're careful, with bishul achar afiyah, it has been baked, and now you're cooking it, but not in a Kli Sheni. Unless it's a kalei habishul. These are items that will easily cook, like tea leaves, tea bags, nana. These you have to be careful with a Kli Sheni, but in a Kli Shlishi there's no problem. Then we have irui and kaf, and davar gush. Irui means to pour. What's pouring? You're pouring from the Kli Rishon onto a Kli Sheni. What is that pouring, that liquid that's being poured in the meantime, in between the two? What is it called, the Kli Rishon or Kli Sheni? As it's coming down. What? That's the question. You see where could this be a problem? Let's say you hold the tea bags is not kalei bishul. Let's say you hold it's not so. It requires more than a kli sheni to cook it. It cannot be cooked in kli sheni. You should still not put it into the cup and pour on top of it. If anything, you would pour the hot water first to the cup and then apply the sugar, the coffee. If those items were not cooked. See, those items have been cooked already, then you pour it directly on top because in bishul lachar bishul. So you can put your coffee and sugar at the bottom and just pour on it. If you don't know, you always safer adding it after you pour the water because as it's coming down, irui is more powerful than the kli sheni. And the rabbi says the mevashel kedei klipa. It has the ability to cook a thin layer of the solid food, whether it's tea leaves or whatever is solid. It does not have the ability, however, to cook the liquid. So when you pour, unless it's a large amount, then of course you're going to warm up everything. Irui does not have the ability to cook the liquid. Because the liquid always moving, right? It's not static. Liquid, so that irui cannot cook just one layer of the liquid, but it can cook a thin layer of a solid food. So you have to be careful that with irui, when you're pouring hot water, it resembles more a kli rishon than it does a kli sheni, or it's in between, but it's much more powerful than kli sheni. There's another question about a kaf. Okay, you're putting in the ladle into the soup. You want to put it into the pot, so you should have a kli sheni into the pot, right? Into the soup bowl. But what about the kaf itself? If that becomes a kli sheni, then your bowl maybe is already a kli shlishi. So we have to determine what's the halacha of the kaf. Because if you're not pouring directly from the pot into the soup bowl, if you're using a ladle, then maybe the contents in your soup bowl is a kli shlishi. It doesn't really make that much difference, depending on what you're trying to add, right? Remember we said kalei bishul, maybe a problem? Well, maybe by the time it hits your soup bowl, the soup bowl is already kli shlishi. You can add anything you want. So some say the kaf is still a kli rishon, because you're grabbing the contents from the kli rishon. It continues to be a kli rishon, and the soup bowl is still a kli sheni. Some say no, that the kaf, the ladle is already a kli sheni, and by the time it hits your soup bowl is a kli shlishi. So what's the halacha? The halacha is if you keep it there long enough in the soup bowl, in the soup pot, if it's there a few seconds, then it could be more like a kli rishon. If you're taking it quickly out, then the soup bowl may be a kli shlishi. We're more mahmir if you kept it there for a while. Yeah. But by the time you eat your soup bowl, it may have already cooled down. So you have to use your judgment. So if it's kalei bishul, we're careful, because that bowl may be still kli sheni. That's where it makes a difference. Otherwise, what are you going to be adding? It's going to be cooked, Either it's been cooked already, or it's not a kalei bishul. There are not that many items, but the problem is we don't know what is kalei bishul or not, what will easily cook or not. So we want to know if that soup bowl is a kli shlishi or a kli sheni, depending on what the din is at the time. Davar gush is solids. Solid food becomes very, very hot. Potato is hot even though you put it in a soup bowl, unless there's other liquid there, and you would not be able to add a spice to it that hasn't been cooked. Because that hot potato is not a liquid that cools off in a kli sheni. Hot foods that are solid continue to be hot, unless they're surrounded with liquids. So if the cholent was not very liquidy, I need a little bit more of kamun, cumin. Well, if the cumin is cooked, then you have no problem. The spice is cooked, it's not a problem. If it's not cooked, you would not be able to add it to the solid food. Because that solid food, if it does not have liquid, continues to be much hotter than a kli sheni. And the last item is solar heating. You're allowed to warm something out in the sun. That's not called real bishul, but you cannot warm up something or toldat chama. That means in Rabbanan, because it resembles toldat shel or. People might make a mistake. So solar heated, something that was warmed up through solar heating is a toldat of the chama. By the time it reaches you, and it may be a problem. This is especially a problem in Israel sometimes. Can you use something that was warmed through solar heating in the same way that you would use it if it's not solar heating, regular bishul? So with the Rabbanan at least, this could be an issue. Toldat of chama is like toldat of ish. People might make the mistake that it's permissible. They don't know how you cook it, how you warm it up. But you just take something outside and put it in your backyard to warm up a cup of water or to defrost something. Right? There's no issue because that's not the conventional way of cooking. Right? There's no fire involved. Whereas the tolda, it came about through the sun, but it was through the solar heating. By the time it reaches you, there's no more sun. So it's a tolda. That, because it resembles the tolda of ish, the Rabbanan, the Chachamim said it's prohibited. Yeah. Right, whatever you warm up. Right, so yeah, so whatever you warm up outside, there's no issue whatsoever. Yeah, you would be able to take out anything outside and warm it up. Yeah. There's no issue. That's not called bishul. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We will talk about it maybe next week or in 2 weeks about all the issues that are midrabanan, how to use it. I just wanted you to become familiar with the concepts. But the applications of all of these things, there's quite a few, and we can't do everything today. But it is an issue. Duk Shemesh is not a simple matter, because as you know, you cannot use warm water on Shabbat to bathe yourself, for example. Right? To bathe yourself. Right? And when you have a boiler, you can't use the hot water in the faucet for another reason. Because after using a certain amount of the hot water, you're causing the cold water to enter and warm up. So there are various issues here. Whereas with the solar heating, this may not be as serious as it is with regular heating, regular boiling. It's still, because it's a tolda of Hamas, it resembles the tolda of Esh, and it still poses a problem. So Rabbi Hashem will leave that for next week. Hopefully we'll get to that. There are quite a few examples of midrabanan that apply almost every Shabbat that Rabbi Hashem will cover. But I wanted you to understand the concept of the various kelim, the various ideas, and Rabbi Hashem next week we'll see how to overcome them or how they may be permissible under certain situations. No, also not. Yeah. You cannot even bathe. Yeah. You can go to the mikveh if you want, if you do that regularly. Right? No period whatsoever. Yeah. There's a question of whether you're allowed to use the cold water for showers. The Rebbe Hashem will talk about that when we get to showers. For Separadim, much more than for Ashkenazim. So you can convert if you want, the other way. Yeah. Anyway, once of course you have a minhag, you can't change it. Yeah. But if the woman is of one minhag and she marries somebody with another minhag, then she needs to follow her husband. Except of course if she's by her parents' home, she wants to eat rice and Pesach and she's Sephardi, it's okay as long as it's in her parents' home. But in her home with her husband, if he's Ashkenaz, no rice. Yeah. Basically, you follow the minhagim, the customs of the husband. Okay, that does it for today. Let's we'll continue next week. Anybody have any questions? There's a lot of information here, and we're going to divide it up in a couple of weeks. Yeah.